Alesha,
Yes.
let's spend some time together.
Yes.
Do you believe it's been just shy of a couple of years before you got invited to do this work? Now, this isn't on our list of questions, but I'm going to have to
I've
ask you this.
learned with
This
you
is
that
coming.
you're going to go
This is
rogue,
coming.
so this is completely fine.
Now, did you ever imagine when you were a high school student at Glenville High School, did you ever imagine you'd be sitting in a room with people like this talking about a region, a county, the well-being of a community? Did you ever imagine yourself when you were a teenager, high school student? Did you see yourself doing anything like this?
I did not imagine myself as a CEO. I did imagine myself doing something to impact community. Because even as a high school student, I was very aware of nonprofit organizations and how they were benefiting my life, and I was curious about these entities. And I knew whatever I did, I needed to do something that would give back to these institutions that were given to my life. But being a CEO, no, that was not in the cards. I rejected that card many a time. But there was something very compelling about Seattle and Seattle Foundation that finally got me to yes.
Has Seattle lived up to your expectations so far?
And then some. It has. I mean, some of you that I know well have heard me tell this story around there's always going to be a little bit of doubt in the back of your mind when you uproot your life from one part of the country and move to another part of the country. Did I make the right decision? Am I doing the right thing? And I had the good fortune to spend most of last November back home with my family and friends. And as much as I enjoyed it, it was the defining moment for me to know that I am absolutely in the place that I need to be, and I'm doing the work that I am meant to do right now. And so there's nothing in the back of my mind anymore wondering, did you make the right choice? I absolutely made the right choice, and I'm grateful to be here.
Since the moment I first met you, and it was a Zoom interview, you've been consistent, and I've listened to you with great care, and I've heard what sounds to me to be like a philosophy of yours, that you believe that this community and this region can be hopeful, can be revitalized, can be joyful, can be a healing place, a restorative place. It's laboring to be, it's not quite there yet, but it requires conversation by conversation, step by step, march by march, epiphany by epiphany. And this is one such conversation, and you imagine many conversations that get us to this place of joyfulness. Does that approximate your philosophy? And tell where that comes from, because you've written about this concept before.
I have. Joy has become such a defining factor in my life and in my career, and that was even prior to moving to Seattle. Because when we think about joy, and if you just sit with that for a moment, even in the way that Taylor brought us into this conversation, it does evoke a feeling for you, right? Whether you think about family or gatherings or your children or block parties, whatever that thing is, it evokes something. A lot of people pull strength from it. It's where hope comes from. It doesn't mean that everything is perfect. Joy can actually exist in the midst of chaos, but it is something that guides us, and for me, reminds me that even in the hard things, there is something beautiful. And so, whether it is Seattle or Cleveland or Detroit, every major urban area and even rural spaces across this country have gone through really challenging moments, and a pandemic only exacerbates what that is. But even in the midst of that, there's still joy happening within in communities, the way that people gather, the way that people rally together to care for each other when things are hard. And that's the thing that has been a driving force for me. And it's why I think about our work at Seattle Foundation and in this community in that way, because this is an incredibly resource-rich area of the country, yet we see the challenges that we face as a community every day when we step outside. Those two things can exist with each other, but in the midst of that, even in neighborhoods that may have been gentrified, people are still gathering and finding space and support with each other. Even in the midst of challenges around homelessness and housing and how are we going to solve for these big issues, there are incredible innovations happening every day that we just need to elevate so more people can see that and invest in it. And so that guiding place of joy being in the middle of the work is something that we want to go full steam on as we go ahead. The words you were quoting around a world not yet born but laboring to be, I hope he kind of pops in at some point in this conversation, but those words are from Marcus Harrison Green, who many of us know as an incredible author and writer in this community. And I tease Marcus about him being one of the most cynical people I've ever met, because sometimes he feels hopelessness, right, in terms of, can Seattle be a better place? But he wrote this incredible piece called I Glimpsed Hope in a South Seattle Park that you can find online. I highly encourage you to read it. And it was the first piece I read from Marcus where he even had to step back as a lifelong Seattle resident and say, I can see it. Like, I can see what's possible as we are gathering in community today, and as every conversation that we have, every epiphany that we have day by day, it's those little moments of building community that get us to the collective power and action around how we make transformational change. And so it's long work, right? It's hard work, it's imperfect, it's messy, but it's possible, and it can be a joyful journey.
I want to stay on the subject of joy just for another question, because I worried in 2015 and 2020, the experience of so many folks of color had been almost branded as one of suffering and one of struggle and one of trauma, fist in the air and marching and fighting, signs in front yards, but it was synonymous with struggle. And yet you and I both know that even in the midst of poverty and struggle, we search for joy, and joy is actually healthy, whether it's at a barbecue or birthday party. And we know that we live longer, that communities are healthier communities when we can hold the complexity of struggle on one hand and joy on the other. As you've talked to people about this concept of a joyful region, what have you heard from others? I've heard your philosophy now, but what have you heard from others when you talk about this idea?
The first thing I always notice is how it brings a smile to people's faces, right? To really center in and think about what joy means for them. I think the other that feels consistent, whether I'm talking to a longtime resident that's now my neighbor and I'm getting to know in my neighborhood, or someone with incredible resource that holds a fund with us, there's a central thing I'm finding that everybody's kind of looking for here. And it's like, am I seen and am I valued in my full humanity and how I show up, right? And that is, it's so simple, but it's so profound for me, because again, it's this thinking about those things that actually unify us and make us so similar versus the things that we tend to lean towards that make us different and create tension. And I think in this moment that we're living in now, where there's so much extreme polarization across issues and ideas and beliefs, those grounding moments where we can fully see each other's humanity and respect and value that is meaningful. And it's been intriguing and encouraging, and something that I want to lean into in this work around, regardless of how you show up, the body you show up in, the socioeconomic status you come from, there's a central desire to be seen and valued. And how do we push that through the work that we're doing at Seattle Foundation?
I think about Seattle Foundation in three dimensions. It's got a significant past, a 75-year-old history, and some people in the room, either fund holders, former board chairs are in the room, hi-end, who represent the past of this organization and the founding of this organization, and we have the present in the room, current stakeholders, and you represent, and we talk about a vision for the foundation. Talk a little bit about what the foundation was and what's your vision for where it is now.
It's a great question. So I'm a big lover of quotes and excerpts, this kind of little things that I capture that guide me. I'm sure my staff is sick of me at this point with the things that I read and quote back to them, but it's a grounding thing for me. And some of you were in this room, so you'll remember this, but you and I, not too long ago, hosted a conversation with past board leaders of the foundation as a way to kind of start to bridge relationship for our current and future board leaders with folks that have kind of taken this journey and understand what it is. It can be guide and support to those that are coming, stepping into leadership now. And one of our past board chairs she said something around how to think about the work of the Seattle Foundation as like a reptile shedding its skin, right? You keep the things that are good and you take that with you, but you let go of what no longer serves you at the end of the day. And that's been such a grounding thing for me to hold on to as I think about the long journey of this institution, right? There's been a steady evolution that this institution has been on, that what you see today and what we're aiming for the future comes from a deep history and a deep grounding of work that's happened over time. And so, the interesting thing about community foundations is that typically we're referred to as philanthropic banks, right? We're set up to hold funds and help you all process grants to places that you needed to go. And that's kind of an inherent part of what a community foundation will always be, and we want to do that well. But I think the evolution into that is, how do we move beyond just the transactional into deeper relationship, into deeper engagement, and quite frankly, having a point of view about how our community continues to thrive and get better, right? Because I don't know any major anchor institution that feels that they can ignore the issues and things that are right at our front door. And if we are gonna reach a joyful community and region, that's not just about a good feeling of cookouts and families and gathering. That's also about how do we address inequities in our community through policy and systems change so that all of us actually experience what it means to live in a joyful, safe place, not just some of us at the end of the day. And so that evolution, though, has been long in the making. You talk to some of the board leaders that have been around for a while. I'm gonna do a shout out and slight tease to Michael Brown, who's in the back of the room, who was one of the first notable, I'd say, heads of grant making for the institution 20-something years ago. He's an advisor to me now in the work to this day. We call him one of the founders of Seattle Foundation because of his longevity. But it's important because we've seen through his work in concert with board leaders that we've had in the past, the steady work to move from just capital projects with big institutions to how do we then support policy and advocacy work, to then how do we support trust-based philanthropy and multi-year giving and flexible resources so organizations on the front lines of community change can do that work fully empowered and well. How do we move beyond just serving those of you that have incredible passions for philanthropy, and we want to do that? So it's a both and. How do we help you do that and invite you in to learn about the incredible work that we're learning about every day with organizations in this work, in the off chance that you want to be an investor with us through what that looks like, right? And so that's a continued evolution of moving beyond the transactional into deeper relationship, because I think I'd be shocked if someone doesn't believe this, but I can always be shocked by things. But I think it takes all of us to achieve the kind of community that we hope for. That's what we mean by collective power, by collective action. And that's where we want to continue to move this work towards as an institution, that all of us are together in what it takes to build a joyful community, because we all have the resources, wisdom, expertise to do so.
I just want to hold the power of a couple of words you said, from transactional into deeper relationship. What's that transition look like? What does deeper relationship in this community mean to you for the foundation? What is that?
Well, this event is kind of one example of that for me. One of the things that was clear for me as just coming into this community 2 years ago and really meeting a lot of people and learning, going through a strategic planning process that our board just approved in March, I think a big thing that was resoundingly clear is that folks like you were saying, Robert, we were just talking about this, like more of getting together. We want to gather, right? We miss that space of having opportunity just to learn from each other and be with each other, like making that space to do that. So it's not just you want to process a grant and we process the grant for you, but what's happening in the community? What's relevant? How are we trying to solve big issues? How can we do that together? How can I do that with you? How do we as a team continue to do the work to help you learn more about and see the work that we're learning from organizations that are in work every day that want to connect with you and want to talk with you about what they're seeing and they're doing, to build that kind of community and relationship to where our common denominator is that we're all members of this community that we care deeply about. But we bring a lot of different things to the table to move that forward. And there's nuance in that, right? And things we got to learn and improve and things we have to unlearn along the way to do that effective and well. But I think that's a part of the journey, that beyond the transactional, how do we start to recognize the community that we naturally have as being a part of Seattle Foundation, and how do we fully take advantage of that on behalf of this community?
Your words remind me of Brian Stevenson, Equal Justice Initiative, who talks about getting proximate to those who suffer. So that's not transactional. That's actually being in community in relation to one another and centering our relationship to one another. You talked about a strategic vision, strategic process. I want you in a minute to talk about the outcomes, but I want you to talk about the process, because the process is as important as the outcomes themselves. So talk about the process of coming to strategic priorities, and then say something about what those priorities are, Alesha.
Absolutely. So 18 months ago, if not a little bit more, but really from the moment that I hit Seattle as a community and started at the foundation, the thing that was resoundingly clear for me from the board actually coming in the door was, how are we going to solve for the business model? The business model needs to evolve and change. And what is meant by that is most community foundations across this country are struggling with, how do we sustain our operations while we're going deeper into work in community to have more impact at the end of the day? Again, in a philanthropic bank model in the most traditional sense, the way that your revenue works is to sustain your ability to do the support for donor advised funds in that part of your business. When you're expanding to go deeper into policy work and youth civic leadership and doing more with discretionary grant making, you got to pay for that, right? If anybody in here owns a business or runs it, like, you understand the concept of, like, if we're going to grow new lines of business, we have to ensure that we can sustain and grow that at the same time in terms of the staff infrastructure, all the things needed to do that well. And so that is an inflection point community foundations find themselves in right now, of how do we evolve the model and strengthen the model to go deeper into community impact. And so my first thought as we were starting to think about strategic plans and how do we guide ourselves was solely on, we got to fix the business model. But in the course of really vetting consultants and talking to community partners and many of you and trying to really think about what are the core questions we would be asking to go through a process, that singular focus of we have to fix the business model evolved to, we actually have to build a business model that ensures we can resource impact work more deeply in this community. That is not just about operations itself, but really, if we want to build a joyful community, how do we bring the full breadth of this foundation to bear to do that work well? Because the non-sexy and internal thing that most people won't know, but we know well, is that we've relied very deeply on our team that does core grant making or discretionary grant making to lead the charge on that, while the rest of the institution is focused in other places, right? And so we're not working as a concerted effort because we don't have the resources that flows across all of that. And so now we're on the path to do that. And that's what the process of the strategic plan helped us to do, to get clear on vision, to get clear on the theory of change. And the theory of change was really about, again, relationship and community. If we're gonna reach the place that we're striving for, what is the best-in-class service we have to offer to donors and partners that come into relationship with us? And then what are the experiences that we are helping to create for all of them? So we're starting to move together. So traditional grant making, yes. And then growing impact investing is another tool to leverage in this work, putting our assets and our capital to work, absolutely. And then engagement opportunities, learning opportunities, coming together to talk and learn and move together, yes. How do these become mainstays of where the work is going? Again, building on our past, but that's the thing that I think will get us to a place of more collective action and also strengthening our operations to get more creative, to get more innovative in how we do this work well.
You're heady. And I want you to move from the head to the heart for a second. So you're talking deep stuff at the moment. I want to come back to the strategic goals in a moment, but let's actualize joyful for you when you get up on a Saturday morning. So when we first met in person,
I'm so shocked you called me heady.
Isn't she? Right? When we first met, we had dinner downtown in Seattle at the market, and you and me and Ed Thomas had dinner, and that was our recruiting dinner. And we stepped outside, and it was raining and raining and raining and raining. I thought, here's Seattle in the market, and nothing but rain. When you get up on a Saturday morning in Seattle, what do you do that brings you joy? Move from the head to the heart. What in our city and in our county, the place that you work, the place that you're trying to improve, what's a day that brings you joy?
Well, I do have to say, because I remember that evening that we had dinner, it was when I made the decision that I wasn't wearing heels anymore because because I wore heels, and Ed Thomas met me in my hotel with his Patagonia little vest on and had me trekking and walking God knows where to get to this restaurant. And so that brought me joy to liberate myself from wearing heels anymore. But a typical day for me, a Saturday morning, especially if it's a sunny and beautiful day, is I'm getting up. I live in Madison Valley. I'm very close to the Arboretum. I've gone to walks with some of you there, and I'm getting out for a nice run. I'm meeting friends for brunch. I'm grateful that I went from having literally one friend when I moved here to a lot of friends now, so that feels good. I'm doing anything arts and culture related. So that could be me walking from Madison Valley into the Central District to go to Wanawari. That could be me going downtown to go to Sam. Whatever allows me to be in the space of creativity and art, I'm gonna soak that in. I heard about Seattle being such an outdoors place. I did not think that would impact me because that was not my lifestyle in Cleveland. I went outside, but I wasn't outside. But you just can't help on a beautiful day here, just to wander and just be out doing something. And those unplanned moments of just capturing the beauty of this place and just wandering to just see people and talk to people and experience Seattle outside of this role, that is a wonderful and joyful weekend for me.
I can't believe nowhere in that answer did you mention Washington football, but but I'm not personally offended by that.
Don't judge me, okay.
So speak to the strategic goals. You talked about the process. What are the goals and how did you get to them? And in the process, let's go back to the word epiphany. What epiphanies did you have in that process of getting to the strategic goals?
Yeah. This is going to be basic for some, but I think important for many of us that have been deeply in the social impact space, in philanthropy, especially in private philanthropy. Community foundations are just very different entities than a private foundation because of the way that it's structured. And so one really important moment for me that I'm grounding my team is that this is actually a business, y'all, and that's okay, right? Because it can be a business that does good in community. When you look at our model, we're an investment management firm, we're a philanthropic advising service, and we're a grant maker, all wrapped into one. Those would naturally be individual businesses or entities in and of themselves. We're all three in one. And so what it means is that the resource parts of that engine have to be managed exceptionally well because they fuel the grant-making piece of what that is at the end of the day. And so grounding ourselves and really understanding the thing that we work for, but knowing that it can still do incredible good and have incredible purpose the way that it has, but even more so going forward, let's get grounded in that as a team, right, and as a board. I think the second piece is really leaning into the ways that learning and engagement and relationship is really the key to how we go forward. Most of what we've leaned into this plan, and we've kind of broken it down into three areas: inspire, reimagine, evolve, center relationship at the end of the day, right? And so the first piece for us around how we inspire, it really is about collective action. Again, what is the work that we can do together? How are we getting sharper with our traditional grant making, with impact investing, which I'm excited we're gonna talk about next, and then also looking at the work that we do through learning and engagement experiences with all of you and so many others to ultimately move more resources into community and spaces where it's deeply needed. And for us, which has always been a driver of our core grant making strategy, 95% of the resources we move are from our funds, and that's incredible, and we love the ability to support that. 5% of the resources is the work that my team does on the core grant making side to fill in the gap, right? And so we know there are still huge disparities around racial equity and justice in terms of who's getting funded and who's not. We want to fill in the gap there. There's still huge underinvestment to organizations that are doing policy and advocacy and systems change work. We want to fill in the gap there, right? And this team has been driving that the last several years. Going forward, we want to create more space for all of us to be doing that together. On the reimagine piece, it kind of ties into the tail end of what I spoke to just now around how do we make the money work more effectively more innovatively, right? And so really leaning into impact investing is a key piece for us within all of that. There's a lot more capital we can put to work in this community to help go towards things we're all trying to work towards, like affordable home ownership, like increasing access to childcare through the types of facilities we have available to support families. Incredible opportunity in this space, and we want to go further there as it's tied to our strategy and what we're learning from organizations leading this work in community and guiding us. And then around evolution is the business model, it's the operational model, right? My goal and vision for this institution to ensure that it continues to be a place of strength for this community is how do we move to the place that we are growing the funds that we manage? Because as we grow funds, we can be in a place of self-fund our operations, so we're not fundraising for our survival as an institution. And how do we endow the resources we have for grant making so that's sustained for years to come, right? So this is always a benefit to this community in meaningful ways, above and beyond just the fund advising services that we naturally provide as a community foundation. So that's the plan and where we hope to go.
You name those priorities. You've also call them 3 bold moves and 3 bold opportunities: early childhood, transit, and housing. Talk about what impact looks like for those 3. If you look back a few years from now, and you want to measure impact, how would you evaluate impact? What would you want to see?
Absolutely. So just a bit on how we got there, right? And so our core grant making strategy, which centers equity and justice, it centers democracy and civic participation, it centers the ways in which that we can help to unlock more public sector resources into community need and areas of opportunity. That's been a kind of a steady beat for us for more than a decade, right? It's guided our work for a long time, and it's come from learning from organizations deep in this work across a variety of issue areas. Because think about it, our lives are multidimensional, right? There's no one single identity that informs who we are or issue that informs who we are. And so we don't look at our work in terms of issue areas, we take in the intersectionality of what all of that is. And so in learning from grantees and organizations over time in that work, coming as a lobbyist, I couldn't help but bring this to the foundation of so let's keep doing that part. And also, if I ask you to look at the next 3 years in our environment, what are the biggest opportunities you see that we have a role as a foundation to have some impact in? And so affordable housing production, and particularly the innovative financing around that, is something that was clear for us. We have the Evergreen Impact Housing Fund. I see Chris Herman's in the back. Shout out to Chris, who is the architect and the brainchild with so many others to cement that work for us around how a philanthropic institution could play an important role in driving towards the housing production we need in this region. That is a tool that we want to deepen because we have a unique opportunity as a foundation to play a role in that space. And then when Darryl comes up, we'll talk about the next evolution of work that we're doing there as well to complement that. And so affordable housing production through innovative financing was clear for us. We talk about transit and transit access. Some folks drive, some folks jump on the bus or the rapid line. I'm learning all things about public transit here, but we know there's still a need, right? But there's even a bigger thing that's happening as we gear up for the November election around how do we protect the state investments that fund transit and so many other important needs. And so from a climate justice angle, we're supporting organizations that are doing really incredible work for the election this fall to ensure that we don't lose billions of dollars that flow into our communities that will impact transit and so much else, right? And then around childcare, as I spoke to before, there are going to be some really important opportunities in the next day budget that, again, grantees are leading this work. We have other funding partners that are coming around the table as well to say, how are we providing the grant resources to organizations that are going to be working really hard to ensure that our state is investing in families' ability to have access to childcare that serves their needs while they're trying to get on the bus or the rapid line to go to work, and then come home, hopefully, to an affordable home within a community of their choice, right? And so all of these things are intersected together, but those are the 3 opportunities that we see to move, and they will evolve over time, right? As our needs in our community evolve over time, and also as the opportunity to have real impact evolve over time. But several years out from now, my hope is that the Climate Commitment Act is still in place, and there are dollars flowing into our communities to support transit and other things. My hope is that anybody I know with little kids, and June was running around here at one point, Rebecca's here that has small children, right? That like one of the things that you're not telling me is a barrier to your success at work is childcare access for you and your family, right? And that when I think about people, even like Omari in the back, who, you know, is kind of behind the scenes, shout out to Converge Media for filming this for us. But like, I want to hear less stories about families that grew up in Seattle, particularly the Central District, but no longer feel like they can stay in place. That like that is no longer a barrier to someone's ability to live in a community of their choice.
Just have to give pause sometimes and just think about the power of these words. So I feel like this is an invitation, Alesha, for us to see the grandness and the complexity of the moment in which we live now, but also to get down to the heart level and wake up on a Saturday morning and step by step, conversation by conversation, make our way through our communities, whether it's Madison Valley, whether it's Rainier Beach, whether it's Bellevue, whether it's North Seattle, or whether it's the University District, and step by step, conversation by conversation, imagining a community that's laboring but close to being fully born, to see in the midst of all the chaos that we're proximate to that chaos, and that this is us, and to find joy in it all, and to be hopeful in it all. So thank you for allowing us to come together and to be connected with each other and have a vision of what it means to be whole.
Thank you.
Alesha.
Thank you, Ed. Yay. Well, with that, now I get to play the interviewer and bring up Darryl. Darryl, why don't you come on to the front? I'm very excited for this conversation. Darryl Smith has been an incredible partner with the foundation and I think in this community for a very long time. You currently are the Executive Director of HomeSight, which is one of our local community development financing institutions, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But you've been in the Seattle community for over 20 years, and so this work, I think, is fair to say personal and purposeful for you. And prior to your work with HomeSight, you were a deputy mayor with the city of Seattle. And so you've done incredible work across economic development, community development, housing, so many areas of importance, and I'm sure are all kind of coming together in this moment for you in terms of what you're doing now.
Feels that way, no doubt. Absolutely. Feels like the right place to be.
Yeah. So, Darryl, why don't we start by, for those that don't know as deeply as some of us have the benefit of, what is HomeSight? What is your why? What is your purpose for existing?
Thank you for that question. It always feels like a gigantic softball that I actually can see and hit, and I appreciate that. So HomeSight is a 32-year-old community development financial institution. CDFIs were started in the mid to late 60s because essentially many financial institutions were not reaching deeply into community, and so we were started here in 32 years ago in the Central District, actually, to really address some of those needs around the ability to be a lender. So we are a statewide, mission-driven lender. We are also a place-based community development corporation, meaning that the place that we actually do our work, we work deeply in community. We're also a developer. We build homes. In our 32-year history, we built hundreds of homes from the CD south to the city limits and a little beyond that. But we're a little different from the standpoint that we are a developer that only builds homes that are for sale. Our calling card is building generational wealth through home ownership. So we're a three-legged stool, if you will, of an organization. We're a place-based community development corporation. So if we happen to be building in a particular area, we're probably going to be doing some economic development work there, some community organizing work there, uplifting what's already been going on in the community in terms of artistic endeavor and connection making, place making. We're a statewide lender. And of course, we are a builder of homes as well. So a little bit of everything.
I love that. one of the intersecting points for us in this work is something called the Black Home Initiative. And again, to give credit to Michael Brown and team for being one of the architects around how do we start to bring a network of players together, whether you're talking about the private sector, the public sector, governmental, nonprofits, to focus in on kind of what you're leaning towards around how do we build generational wealth from home ownership, and focus in areas and communities, particularly Black folks, where home ownership has been a challenged thing, and in a community with high rising prices and market conditions that sometimes push people out, that's not a barrier to people's ability to have safe homes. And so would love your perspective on why HomeSight thought it was important to be a part of something like a Black Home Initiative, what it has meant for your institution. Just a little bit of your reflection there.
Yeah, and it was frankly very easy for us to find our way to BHI. I was approached by Michael Brown and our dear friend Marty Coistra, formerly of the Housing Development Consortium, and essentially this is basically why we exist, frankly. HomeSight, as I mentioned, was started in the Central District some 32 years ago, and because we're a home ownership organization, it felt foundational to us to really be a part of BHI. We are an implementing agency. In fact, the program I'd like to talk a little bit more about is really under the banner of BHI, and I want to provide just a couple of numbers to give you some context here, which is in Washington State, half of Black Washingtonians, nearly half, 4 in 10, have zero net worth. That means that you talk to your community members, your neighbors, your friends, many of them have zero net worth if they are African American. And this is, frankly, the result of policy and government action that has led to this condition. And so for us to be a partner in BHI along with 90 other members, all rowing in the same direction, if you will, to really fulfill a widely shared goal. Our priority is 1,500 new Black, low and moderate income homeowners in the next 3 to 5 years, and then a doubling of that number in the ensuing 5. So for us to be involved in this space makes absolute sense in terms of what we can bring to the table. And what we all realize is with the disparity in home ownership for BIPOC communities, and particularly African American community, it's really incumbent upon us to behave differently. We have a lot of amazing organizations in our sector that are in the housing sector here in Western Washington and beyond, and yet the numbers are the numbers. They're staggeringly bad. In fact, the home ownership rate for Black folk in Washington State is about half of the white community, and it's going the wrong direction. It's actually worse today than it was pre-1968 when racial segregation in housing was legal. It's worse today than it was then. So clearly, there are a lot of amazing organizations, but data just doesn't lie, and the data is the data. So BHI's effort in creating an impact network is really the only way to move the needle on a very difficult and old problem, and we have a role to play within BHI. That's why we're here.
So one of the things I appreciate is the way that, and what I love about being in this community and working with the partners that we do, is the ability to take a very holistic view at an issue and think about the role that all entities can play in trying to affect change there, right? And so we talked about affordable housing as a need. I think most of us deeply experience that across this community. And Evergreen Impact Housing Fund being kind of a important, broad, and strategic effort to get at that as a whole. But even within that work, starting to drill down and figure out where are the gaps? Where are we not focused in ways that we need to deepen focus because of lack of access or underinvestment or things that we're just missing as systems players where we can go deeper, right? And so that leads us into a really intentional look at home ownership within communities of color, but particularly within Black communities because of the data that you just cited here. But then there's another component of it that we start to get into around who's actually developing the homes at the end of the day, right? And how does that impact where affordable housing goes? And what does that tell us about the construction and development ecosystem in terms of who has access to capital and resources to do this work and who does not, right? And so born out of the Black Home Initiative, there's this little thing called the Field Order 15 Fund, right? Which is very striking and very interesting. And I invite you to talk about what the fund is, but also invite you to reflect on the name and its meaning.
Yeah, this is this has been a powerful experience for me personally and professionally with HomeSight. And some months and months ago, I think I was perusing the New York Times, and it was talking about development across the country, and Seattle is experiencing a severe dearth, a housing shortage that we've frankly never experienced before. I forget what the number of units down we are, but it's a very, very big and staggeringly bad number, exacerbated by lack of supply, higher interest rates, and so the problems we're experiencing as a region become even deeper and more stark, and then throw COVID in there as well, right? So this article was talking about developers across the country, and there was a line that I noticed that talked about the number of actual developers of color. It was something like 1 or 2% nationally. And then we think about what that means for us here locally in a place that's experiencing this kind of shortage. And so under the banner of BHI, we started talking about and having conversation with Black developers down at the Foster Golf Course outside of Tacoma there. We gathered some folks together, and we wanted to really hear from them. What are the challenges you face? Why are you not in the mix in terms of being a part of the unfolding story of how we actually close the gap on housing units that need to be developed? And what we really clearly heard were some of the same barriers that our customers that come to HomeSight for a loan, right? So HomeSight requires 1% down, a credit score of 620, right? And we can get you into a mortgage. Right? It might take us a year working with you, credit repair, all the things that a CDFI should do. But the defining factor is we do a tremendous amount of down payment assistance because our borrowers are not dragging a pile of cash behind them. The Black developers we spoke to have experienced some of the same barriers. The most difficult funds to come up with first are on feasibility. That's usually how many credit cards can I max out, how many family members can I borrow from to figure out what to do with this piece of dirt. So when we got that feedback and realized that, among other barriers, not the least of which might be balance sheet or experience or connections, all of these things, we really started thinking deeply about how could we address these barriers. So we began building a program which turned into the Field Order 15 Fund. It's really a program. And when I thought about my own family history in South Carolina and the history of land for the Black community in the United States, I began thinking very clearly about General Sherman and his famous march after the Civil War, and the fact that on January 12th, I believe, 1865, he met with Black leadership in Savannah, Georgia, and asked, what do the newly freed slaves need? And the answer clearly from those leaders was land. We knew how to work land, that's for sure. My people came from, the part of Africa and brought with them the knowledge of rice farming, right? My people are called Geechees from the Carolina coast, right? People may be familiar with that. Well, Sherman had confiscated, under the Union Army, 400,000 acres of land from Charleston to the St. Johns River in Florida, from the Atlantic Ocean inward, 400,000 acres. And the idea, which was Special Field Order 15, was to redistribute that land from the Confederate South to the newly freed Black folk in 40-acre plots and a mule, 40 acres and a mule. That's a familiar phrase to some of us, right? Well, after Lincoln's assassination, President Johnson rescinded that order, and we never got our 40 acres and a mule. And we've been trying to look for reparative justice in housing, frankly, in a lot of ways ever since. You throw in on top of that racially restrictive covenants and redlining in most American cities, including Seattle, and then you can understand why the naming of this fund as Field Order 15, in our view, is reparative lending. It's a loan program that's a little bit different, focusing on Black developers to be a part of the answers we need to create the housing that the community needs in places where, frankly, large developers might not be looking, might not be playing, and approaching this in a way that building for ourselves and creating those opportunities for community members by folks who look like them is a really important part of this story as well. So that's what Field Order Fund set out to do, and we're on a very exciting moment right now because we now, after building the fund and gathering investment and making a lot of friends, including quite a few folks in this room, and more, I hope, we are beginning to actually execute on the fund and fund those Black developers who otherwise would still be struggling with how many credit cards can I max out? Who can I possibly get a loan from? Where's the next hard money lender with exorbitant interest rates that I have to really work hard to make sure I can actually produce? So I know it's a little bit of a long story, but it's an important one in terms of why this fund is named as such and what we hope to do with it.
No, I deeply appreciate that. And I think the thing that excites me personally is prior to moving to Seattle, I was involved in similar work in Ohio, right? And so this is really a move that is happening across the country, especially in communities that are struggling with housing affordability and production. Like, everybody's got to be in the game to figure out these challenges within communities, right? And where has there been a lack of access that we need to solve for, whether you're talking about the home ownership piece or the development piece to move in that way. And so I left Cleveland before I could see the work I was involved in come to fruition. So it is an honor to be here now to be a part of the work that's happening in Seattle. You know, to that point of, you know, Field Order 15 as a program, as an initiative, there is a fun component to this. And this is where everybody in this room gets to potentially have a role in the collective work together, right? Where our team has been on incredible work. And Taylor, raise your hand so people know who you are. Ken, you're brand new, but raise your hand. Our Director of Social Impact Investing, Michael Brown in the back, who's been a key advisor and partner on this. These are folks that have deep knowledge about where this work is and where it's going. And so if you have any interest or intrigue about what you're hearing, you saw the hands, please talk to them, Darryl as well. But let's get into some of the mechanics, right? Like this isn't just a theoretical thing we're talking through, like stuff is happening. So what's happening? Where are we at this point in terms of really making that move towards investing in BIPOC developers to be doing this work?
Absolutely, and we are at an exciting moment. So first, we have an amazing team underneath us. The underwriting team that I get the pleasure and honor of working with includes folks with 30 plus years of banking experience, construction, lending experience, fund management. So there's some super smart people around the table. We're certainly blessed with that in this region. So I have a great team. And where we're at right now is we've been able to pull together investment and grant dollars from a few different sources. And so we've been able to make awards. Funds are coming to developers, and the next step for them would be to work directly with what we call our field coordinator. We have someone with about 20 years of construction management experience who I used to work with at the City of Seattle. And by the way, Ken and I used to work together at the City of Seattle years ago. So Ken and I go way back. And Dolly Small is her name, who was at City Contracting while I served as deputy mayor, has that direct hand-to-hand sort of guidance with our developers. And what we do is we created a sort of checklist system based on successful development. HomeSight's been a developer for many years. We have other developers at the table. So you follow that checklist system, right? And that makes you eligible for your up to $30,000 grant. We'll increase that number to 50 if we're going to do something like a land trust or a limited equity cooperative, which builds into that development permanent affordability for the next family, right? So we'll award you a few more bucks. Go through another set of checklists with Dolly right there, guiding you if you need it. We work with some developers with a lot of experience, some that are a little newer to the game. Maybe they've done 3 or less projects, but that checklist system is critical because it's developers, you know, nothing is ever guaranteed or carved in stone, but we can really take and mitigate the risk greatly by following a proven checklist system. So you follow that system, now you're up and ready for your up to $250,000 below market interest development, pre-development loan. That's incredibly important for this group of developers because they're used to hard money lenders, high interest rate, tougher constraints, right? So you up to that $250,000 pre-dev loan, and the package that we ask you to put together is, no surprise, exactly what a construction lender is going to require. So we're building success in for the developers, and so by the time there's what we hope is a warm handoff to construction lending, and again, making those referrals and relationship building with construction financing in the region, our developers who come through this program have, we hope, a higher propensity to win the award to get sticks out of the ground, right? That's what this is all about for us. So we build a program for them that we hope will lead to success. That $250,000 pre-development loan is incredibly key. That's where the investment comes in, because what we want to do is over the course of 18 to 24 months, revolve those funds, right? Bring that money back in and fund the next project. And where we're at right now, I can share with this group that about a week ago, we made our first award. So there are 3 developers that will now be funded for feasibility. 2 are in Tacoma, townhome development, including the Hilltop neighborhood, the historic African-American community in Tacoma, one here in South Seattle. So that's a total of 20 units so far that will be moving down those checklist steps toward their pre-development loan. The underwriting group meets again on another Friday. We'll be looking at a 40-unit townhome development in Tacoma and one in Seattle. So we hope that by the time we're moving into late summer, we'll be upward of funding 100 units of housing made by Black developers here in this region. Unprecedented. That's what this is all about.
That's incredible. Thank you. Thank you. And so I hope those of you that are here can see kind of this push that we're looking to deepen and make around long-term steady funding through organizations like HomeSight and others that have been doing important work for years, that is leading us to a place to get clear about, so as one of my board members would say, what's the chewable impact? What's the meaningful thing that we can jump into now? That leads to the birth of things like Evergreen Impact Housing Fund, the Black Home Initiative, and then Field Order 15, right? And so, but all of this is a part of one of the things I named for the foundation in particular around what are the bold moves that we will continue to make towards doing our part to support the production of affordable housing in this region, right? As we're looking at the next years to come. And so if there was a call to action for all of our friends here today from you, Darryl, and thinking about that goal, what would it be?
Two things, and again, I so appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and to be invited to be in community with all of you, and to get to know a little bit more of the work that HomeSight does. But equally, if not more important, my ask would be to, and it's really easy to do, go to the website and take a look at the Black Home Initiative Network. This impact network, from my perspective, being around this community for a long time, I'm a little older than I look, I like to think, and I've never experienced the feeling I have of these organizations really rowing, as I say, in the same direction to make tangible change in community. Because as I mentioned, there are a lot of amazing organizations in our region. We're rich with talent and dollars, frankly, and passion here. And yet, if we really look at ourselves in the mirror and pull up that data, that number, data doesn't care what side of the political aisle you're on, it's just data. And it's not good, frankly, when it comes to housing for communities of color in Washington State. And so please support BHI. Look at the Black Home Initiative Network's website. There's probably a place for you or your organizations to lean in there. We need more friends. We need more people to understand that we all do better when we all do better. And so if we can meet our shared goal of 1,500 new Black homeowners, there is ripple effect for the rest of the community. And when I think about the gap in home ownership numbers as a CDFI lender and developer, I think about, who didn't get to go to college, right? Because they didn't have generational wealth in that family. Who didn't start a successful business, right? Who didn't survive a catastrophic health emergency because generational wealth wasn't present? Those things are hard to do when you have zero net worth. And that's really what we're looking at right now. So my one ask would be to please take a look at BHI and support that effort. And then, I won't say selfishly, because I think it's for all of us, we would love to have more support in the Field Order Fund. We think this is an extraordinary opportunity. The feedback we're getting from the developer community is really, really both surprised, like, wow, you're actually doing this? Because I've been fighting this battle for a long time. Or I'm newish to the game, and this is a system that I can follow with, hand-to-hand help on how to get through the process. So it feels really new and different for a lot of the folks we're partnering with. So I would love extra support for Field Order Fund specifically. We're very, very proud that HomeSight is helping to stand up the fund, and our partnership with the Seattle Foundation and BHI. This effort would not be possible without that support. So we thank you so much.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking Darryl for sharing the story. I love it. They love it. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Okay. So this is the part where I think, Ed, you get to join us back up here, and we get to turn it over to all of you to hear your questions and your reflections and your thoughts as a result of this conversation. This is the beautiful part about being in a community, is that we want it to be a dialogue. And so I believe we have a microphone here that we'll ask you to come to. This helps us make sure that we capture your question and that everyone can hear you. But invite any reflections, questions that folks have in this conversation. Don't be shy. I don't think this is a shy group. I don't. Hey,
Hi.
Michael.
Hey, how's it going, Alesha? Is this not on? As the Field Order 15 fund becomes more successful, how do you see that putting more pressure on current financial institutions and other maybe CDFIs?
So interestingly, pressure is an interesting word. I think what we're experiencing right now is also exposing other areas that I would call the lack of health in our housing ecosystem. Pre-development is one of those answers that we're working on currently, but we also see other areas. We need more transit-oriented development. We need different housing types for the community. If I think about development specifically, we're running into an issue where land acquisition is a challenge, right? And so, that developer, has to actually acquire the land to be able to develop it, right? So we're seeing that as a possible challenge that needs to be surmounted. And we're having some really interesting deep conversations with financial institutions right now about how we can get more of them off the sideline to really be a part of the answer in terms of construction financing. That conversation's been going on for a while. We think we're making progress there. But I'll share with you as well, HomeSight is right now developing a 68-unit limited equity cooperative at Othello Station, just adjacent to the light rail station. Co-ops are very common where I come from back east in the New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia area, really unheard of out here. And so we're doing one of the first large co-ops in South Seattle that has a pilot nature from the standpoint that this will be the first large development that takes advantage of the community preference policy. So if you were pushed out of the community over pricing, we can actually serve you first. We can segment half the units for folks that meet the community preference policy designation. So it's an anti-displacement tool to come back or to not be pushed out, right? We've been through 3 or 4 different lenders to try to get the construction financing for that because, there isn't a comp for it. There aren't 5 others like it. We don't get it. So we've had to go through an education process both for the community and for financial institutions to understand what we're doing. We're an innovator. We get that. So we're going to have to go through some extra hoops. But your question's a really important one because it as we reveal some of these challenges within the housing ecosystem, that's what Field Order Fund is spurring. It's spurring some of these conversations. So my hope is that over the course of the life of Field Order, we'll get some of these problems solved, and maybe some years from now we won't be talking about it as a gigantic challenge. Long answer, I know, but important question.
Hi, everybody. I have a question just like fundamentally about impact investing. And, as you think about philanthropic dollars that have been set aside with Seattle Foundation to be invested in community, how has this idea of impact investing come into thinking about how we can better deploy philanthropic resources?
I'll take a stab at that. I have a feeling you're not going to take a stab. Okay. So impact investing is, it is not unique to Seattle, right? Like this is something that philanthropy as a sector is getting much smarter about and has been for a while now. Kresge Foundation is probably one of the hallmarks that a lot of people think of in terms of the robust team they have built to complement their grant-making team so that you're using different tools to impact change at the end of the day, right? So there is the traditional grant, yes, provided to an organization to do good work with no expectation of financial return. And then there are program-related investments or mission-related investments, as they are sometimes called, which are low-cost or no-cost loans that are being provided to organizations as a way to really work capital in important ways. And so everything that Darryl was describing, right? Like There are some considerations you can make around a grant to a BIPOC developer, but to really build that pathway into them being able to really do work within the traditional financing system, low-cost loans that kind of take the barriers out but still build that acumen are deeply important, right? And so this ability to really think about across different issues, how do you leverage traditional grant making but then introduce new tools like impact investing, especially when you're talking about community or economic development issues. It's really important to leverage that in meaningful ways. You can put more money to work leveraging impact investing because it's rotating capital at the end of the day, right? And so the Seattle Foundation Board, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm looking at you to help me with this a little bit, is that some years ago, our board did support accessing a pot of funds, thank you, Ann, okay, a board member at that time, right? To put into rotation in this way, right? Of like, how do we have cyclical capital moving into community that complements the grant making to provide more tools to get at the impact that we're striving for. And so I have been long a supporter of this type of tool to use within the philanthropic space. I think we have incredible opportunity to deepen that in the work we're doing with the foundation. But the caveat is, right, before everybody starts calling me with their great impact investment idea, is that the discipline that we're bringing to the work is how does it derive from our core grant making strategy? That we're not launching a retail business around impact investing for anybody that's interested in using that as a tool. But we're really thinking about the opportunities within this community across housing as a key example we're talking about here, development as a key example that we're talking about here, where we can put additional tools to work with the grant making to make that go further. And so it's an incredible compliment and move in the field to see dollars be used in this way. And we hope to do more of it at the foundation.
Alesha, you and I are the same height. Thank you for a great conversation. I really liked learning about the three focus areas, and I think it's great as a longtime transportation professional like Yay Transit and hearing about the 100 housing units. And one of the things that I was thinking about is as you really dig into these three areas, which makes a lot of sense. What do you think is the foundation's role in the fact that these needs will continue to persist as long as there are great inequities growing, meaning it is incredible to focus on affordable housing, and as income inequality grows, that need will only continue, and as as income inequality grows, people will continue to be forced out of the city, and the need for transit will grow because land use will continue to sprawl. And where do you see the foundation's role in the fact that disparities are growing, and so the need will keep growing?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And so one thing I want to make more explicit that we really talked about in our strategic planning process and has guided our core grant making strategy is that while I'm telling you about three opportunities we see in the short term to have meaningful impact, what always undergirds and guides the work that we do are two things. The first is a focus on a healthy democracy building, civic participation. There's no issue that we're talking about here today that doesn't engage us as voters at some point or another, or just as citizens that have to be actively engaged in our community. And so the grant making we do to support a healthy and just and inclusive democracy, to encourage and foster civic participation, a through line that will continue. The second is around public resources and how they are better maximized for the things that we're talking about at the end of the day. Philanthropy in and of itself cannot affect the transformational change we're talking about in communities alone. You just can't, right? The size of public sector dollars compared to even what the richest of us in this room can do, it is not the same, right? They need each other to really move towards the impact that we're striving for. And so, I'm new here, so I invite others with their reflections on just kind of what you've seen in the state systems around resources and how they move. But I think, I know another very clear line for us within our grant making strategy is the policy and advocacy work, because we need to unlock more public resources to complement the philanthropic resources, whether they're institutional or donors, to really see movement on things in big ways, right? You need the policy piece, you need incredible infusion of resources, and you need active and committed and passionate and smart individuals to make all of that work. And so that's how we think about it. I think as this community continues to evolve, and this is where, again, I'm new here and observing, but like, I've never experienced so many elections in my life until I moved here in terms of local ballot initiatives and efforts. So that's telling me something about how we resource things from a public sector standpoint and think about that. And I think it's going to be a continued conversation, even looking at this November's ballot and even beyond, around what's the conversation we're having as Washingtonians around how do we invest in the things that we know are needed to support our community in meaningful ways and address the inequities that we're seeing in terms of like who really can live fully in a joyful community and who cannot. So more to come, and I'll be learning that piece with all of you. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you went very thoughtfully to the place we need to go, Alesha. But there's another part of this that I would call the moral imagination also around our community. So when we listen to my colleagues in population health talk about health metrics, and we can drill down to neighborhoods in this, and it's not just global data, but we can drill down the neighborhoods. And I don't have to name the neighborhoods that depending on the neighborhood that you grow up, a child born in X community will live 20 years less than a child born, and these are 11 miles away from each other. And so we can put that research out there and talk about that data. But it's the moral imagination that asks us, what's happening in these communities that are just so powerfully unhealthy? And it's all the things that we're talking about. And these are ethical and moral issues at this point, because now we know the neighborhoods and we know what needs to happen. And this is that notion of joyful community again. How do you grow up and be, and not gentrified out of a community, but actually be in that community and have resources in that community that become healthy and well? And it's how we eat, it's our ability to work. Ben, when I first started talking to Ben Danielson when he was at Odessa Brown, Ben was working on things like, if you can't get to an appointment at Odessa Brown and you live way in South, and you live an hour away, we have to rethink even what it means to get access to health care if you don't have transportation. So these things are interconnected. They're not three different things, they're interconnected, and underneath it all is race and equity. So, but again, getting back to that, not being overly simplistic, but what does it mean to have a neighborhood that's lit up, that's safe, where there's libraries, there are places of learning and places of joy? That's when we get back to imagination, because it's not okay to have some of us living remarkably well and 8 miles away. And we can see each other, which is the weird thing, right? We can look across a bridge and see and experience inequities. And those become ethical issues and we have to have that conversation as well.
Incredible. Well, with that, I want to thank you all. I'm going to turn this to Taylor to bring us home.
Well, I think that was such a poignant moment to end on, right? Absolutely beautiful. Ed, Darryl, Alesha, Ed, thank you so much for guiding us through this really thought-provoking conversation. One of the things that I think about when I think of a joyful region is the fact that we all do better when we all do better. So thank you for bringing that up, Darryl. I hope that you can take that moment and in the honor and spirit of community, stand back there, eat the food. I've heard that the chocolate is delicious. Please join with us, have conversations. If you want to know more about Field Order 15, come find us. We'll raise our hands again. Thank you so much for being in community and space with us. I appreciate your time and hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
My biggest takeaway was just the joy that comes from gathering and being in a space together, having supporters here, having people that are curious about our work here, but just the energy and joy that comes from sharing space on things that we care about. That was big for me today.
It really brings it all to fruition, from an initial conversation of trying to coax her to the community to really having her be a true member of our community, be deep in it, and really creating an inspired vision for this. So for me, it's just deep, deep satisfaction and gratitude for being in partnership and in work with Alesha.
I think people were excited. From the conversations I had once we broke and kind of ended, people felt clear about the work that we're trying to do. They felt curious about the ways that they can get involved. I think what really continues to resonate for me is the place that people go in understanding that at the end of the day, to address inequities, we have to talk about broader systems change and reform. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to one of our high net worth fund holders or talking to a community partner. people always still seem to gravitate towards that place of it's not going to take personal wealth or resource in and of itself to create a more equitable system. We're going to need policy change to make sure that happens at the end of the day. And that's inspiring and encouraging to hear people from different walks of life understand that. I think the opportunity in the coming years is the community courage and will to move in that way to make that real for people.
It was great to hear about the vision from the new leadership of the direction of the organization. But most inspiring is the work that they're doing around housing for Black folks in Seattle and Tacoma. I am currently living in Southwest Washington, and knowing that HomeSight is a statewide organization, I immediately wanted to have a conversation about how we can have these types of discussions in Southwest Washington, where we're experiencing very similar issues, specifically because we're impacted by the migration of Black folks into from Portland into Southwest Washington because of affordability. So we want to be able to house folks, Black folks, in Southwest Washington and have them feel like this is a place that they belong as they're migrating across the river.
I'm excited about the new direction because it builds upon years of really good, solid work. Yet, this new direction provides more clarity, and in the spirit of partnership, just a reminder that the foundation doesn't do anything on its own. It does it in partnership with many others in the community. So as the catalyst for the Black Home Initiative, I have a lot of interest in this work. Building the partnerships across community in order to identify the barriers that are in the way for Black folks to secure home ownership opportunities. I thought this is a great opportunity to have others hear about the work that we've been doing and laying the path for many years.
It has been a privilege, and it is a privilege for me to lead this institution at this moment in time, to help Seattle Foundation step into its next chapter around deeper impact, to pursue a vision of a joyful community of shared prosperity, belonging, and justice. This is near and dear to me. And so I'm excited to be able to work with donors and fund holders and grantee partners and so many others toward realizing that vision. And I think that's the opportunity that we have here together.
The pandemic forced us to think about our relationship to one another in very, very different ways and called us to rise up in service to each other. And it really was a powerful moment in which we understood that we really are all better off when we are all better off. It's not about me as an individual, but your health is as significant to my well-being, and so we are tied together in that way. And I hope we don't lose the lessons from the pandemic, which is we're all in this together. So this isn't the moment to step in and step back out, but it's a moment to step in and be in it and realize that through the foundation that we can do some really powerful and significant things in community with each other.